introduce to you Krishna Kumar. He is a pioneer in the sphere of leadership and executive coaching in India. He believes that a leader's role is to bring about a positive transformation in society. While most of us dream of being in a better place, great leaders have got to where they are by applying the right form of leverage. And coaching provides them with that perfect lever. With all that said, I want to welcome you, Krishna. We're very happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you also, Nicole, who's supporting us on this webinar. As always, I'm delighted to be with all of WBECS this year. I have been a speaker at WBECS a number of years now, and it's a great privilege again for joining me today. And what I intend to do is to share with you a little bit about the world of leadership and what coaches can do to support that particular world. The title I chose for today's presentation is When Leaders Drive, Businesses Thrive. And the reason I picked up that particular topic is simply because I asked myself these questions very often as a leadership coach, is what exactly is leadership drive? And following that, what makes a business thrive? And what could coaching do to support a high-performing leader? Today, I hope to be able to share with you, based on my experience in coaching a number of executives and leaders across industries, across the world, and also some of the research and work I've been doing on developing a model that we can apply to try and get the best out of leaders whom we coach, and the mechanisms that we can use to get them to make a thriving business. Before I begin, let me take this opportunity to ask you to help me out on this one. So what I'm going to do is look at leadership in a world that is now popularly being called VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It's become kind of like a buzzword, but it's kind of important simply because coaching today for a leader is quite different from what it was maybe a decade ago. Leaders today are expected to produce results under very high pressure. And because of a world that is transforming so rapidly through technology, their performance is getting more and more visible at a global level. Let me ask you a simple question. Put up out here maybe 10 leadership qualities. When I decided to select 10, these were not so random in that I was able to hone in around 25, 26 leadership qualities based on work done by really prominent people in the field. But I picked up 10. And I'm asking you to let us know from the poll what you believe to be the top five that you have. And please make a note of what you've selected. I think perhaps now, Kristen, maybe we can end the poll because the responses are coming in a little slower. And what we do see is that, if we can share the results of the poll also, is that the key ones are engagement and trust, emotional intelligence, authenticity, integrity and vision are really right on top. And somewhat lower scores have been given to social responsibility, balancing skill, assertiveness are probably at the lower end of the scale. And with that, let us keep what you've selected with you, and we will move on and probably come back to these results towards the end of today's session. Moving on, thank you very much for that, Kristen, and for everybody for taking part in that preliminary poll, and we will use these results as we go along. Let me move ahead and speak about a situation that I want to share with you, and most of my presentation today will be working through that situation. This is actually a real life case that I was involved in as a coach to, let me call him Joe. I have, for reasons of confidentiality, obviously, changed the industry that we are talking about and changed the name of the person. But in many ways, the context has been kept as it was. High fashion in this context is a market leader in the luxury leather goods business, and Joe has been the CEO for a couple of years. And in that time, Joe has done a terrific job in terms of growing market share, double profits, and improve their global brand image. So what's the problem here? And the problem here is that Joe is facing a number of challenges. Fundamentally, which is not very surprising given his performance. In this case, Joe happens to be very task-oriented. He loves an environment of working under pressure. To a large extent, he transfers that to the people who work with him. But not surprisingly, perhaps for many of us, the employment engagement scores aren't that great. He's also had a big issue because he's been termed unpopular for not funding a social project, a daycare center for the kids of employees in the local community. But the interesting thing is, when he's questioned about these issues that were raised, Joe defends his leadership style. And he says, what's important is his performance. And which is really where the challenge comes in. And at the time I was brought in to coach Joe, let me say that Joe and I share a terrific relationship, and he's a really good man. The problem that happened for Joe was that it was a question, as we discovered, and I'm sure many of you, veteran coaches, experienced people, senior people in this on this call will know, the problem lay with the fact that Joe was not self-aware. And what could we do to make Joe self-aware then became the issue. And why in this context was it so important for Joe to be self-aware? Moving into that, we question ourselves and ask, if self-awareness is the key, where did this all start? And it's a topic I'm really very, I would say passionate about in the world of self-awareness. And I'll come to that in a moment. But I've walked us through the generations, the decades and the thousands of years gone by, and all through we come across this particular topic and why it's so important. Way back, Abraham Maslow said, what is necessary to change a person is to change his awareness of himself. Very recently, an author called Daniel Shiriak said that being self-aware is not the absence of mistakes, but the ability to learn and correct them. And way back, maybe the 600s BC, one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece, Thales of Miletus, said the most difficult thing in life is to know yourself. If self-awareness is so very important, what do we do about it? Over the past couple of years, this is work that I've done in the topic of awareness. I developed a little model called Aware, and I presented this model. I was very happy to do that at WBECS a couple of years ago. And I broke it up into 5 components: awaken, willpower, action, reflection, and engagement. Those of you who are interested in looking into this, you will have access to details of the Aware model during the full summit, when I'll be speaking about it in a lot more detail. But for the moment, let me just say that these 5 components help us stay in a state of awareness, and at the peak level of awareness, it's called meta self-awareness. And it's really important for us to try and reach that particular state as many times as we can during the course of a full day. But awareness can exist at multiple levels. And what are these levels? Let's take the very first level of being self-aware that we spoke about. We can go beyond self-awareness into the realm of social awareness, and then even extend it further to the level of systems awareness. We can call them inner, other, outer. Daniel Goleman has mentioned that very nicely in his writings. So if you were to look at all the 3 of inner, other, social awareness, systems awareness, let me just start by speaking about the very first one, which is self-awareness. And what's self-awareness all about, and what's the problem in self-awareness? As you can see in the screen, our minds are more or less at any given point of time buffeted by thoughts. And these thoughts typically can be compartmentalized into words that I've mentioned there. One is the question of who am I? Very often you question as to what are you doing in something or in some activity, who are you really? And the second one is to do with your dreams and desires and goals that you have at times that keep floating in and out, and they could change. And third part is your emotions and feelings. And all the three components keep, buzzing in our minds and cause a lot of distraction. What I spoke about in the AWARE model last time was how do we manage distraction. That's a topic in itself and a very powerful topic, but for today, I want to move a little further and speak about a couple of other things. One of which I would call the learning curve, and a lot of that in the time to follow today. And the next one is balancing the paradoxes of our personality. On the learning curve part, this is very interesting. And here is where I actually challenged Joe when we were speaking in our conversations, because, like I said, I had an excellent rapport with him, and Joe is, he's a performer. And he's been performing. He's been on this curve, which is commonly called the sigmoid curve. What we are seeing out here is performance on the upswing. And Joe had reached somewhere near the peak. Let me just mark it there. It was a point at which we can say that, he could actually take a break and look around and maybe reflect as to where he was heading. Now, if we don't do this, if as a coach, Joe and I did not stop and take this opportunity for reflection, there is a possibility that you could reach without reflection right to the top and actually reach what is called the point of entropy. The point of entropy can happen when you have a situation where, though you have reached the peak of your performance, something happens and you tend to lose energy. It happens to most people. They reach a certain peak and then performance actually dips. And when it dips, that point of entropy is, in many ways, we can classify it as a loss of energy. So what should we do? The key to it is to go to that reflection or that observation point, which is fortunately where Joe and I were in our conversations, and look towards making a step where we actually are able to start another curve and overcome this danger or this problem of entropy. I will walk us through some of this in a few moments. So let us hold it out there and only understand for ourselves the importance that this performance curve brings to us in terms of being able to take a pause, take a step back, figure out where we are heading, use that space for reflection. And only when we do that can we take the next steps, which I will be sharing as we move along. The other element that I wanted to speak about is the element of personality. Most of us, our personalities can be, this is based on the study of the yin and the yang. It's called the study of paradox. And when you study paradoxes, what you see is that in our personalities, we have soft or dynamic traits, and most people tend to be one or the other. People with opinions can be open and reflective, or you can be very certain about what you think. At the other end, which is the dynamic trait, and the soft trait is the more gentle one. You can be warm and empathetic, or you can be the enforcing type in your management or leadership style. You could be collaborative, you could be authoritative. And as with, I'm sure by now most of us could guess where Joe stood, it would be more on the right side of our screen. So what is it that a coach can do to remove this imbalance? And is it possible that a person who holds firm opinions can be open to being reflective? To do that, that's where we talked about the leverage. A coach can come in very well, act as a pivot, get the person being coached, in this case, Joe, to learn to be balanced. So a person who's having certain holding firm opinions or is reflective can now be open to exploration of his own opinions. Or he can start enforcing but with compassion. Or his collaborative and authoritarian style could be a blend of both so that he becomes participative. In the study of paradoxes, there are many. I mean, there could be 20, 30 kinds of paradoxes. I've chosen 3 for illustration. Once again, when I go into detail in the full summit, we'll be covering many more. But all these paradoxes are a combination of traits where people think that they contradict each other. They cannot come together. But a person who is able to balance both can come up with extraordinary ability and versatility to manage his leadership. And that's the nice part of it. Let's move on to the second challenge that Joe faced. And this time around, it was not so much to do with himself, but it was to do with what his style was doing to other people. Not only was he working under pressure, but he was putting a lot of people under pressure. So what could he do? What was the need for him that he needed to bring about to overcome this situation that he was causing in the workplace? Once again, I spoke about this in great deal of detail last year at WBECS when I had a topic called transformation through trust, where we work on building trust in other people. And the reason that the absence of trust takes place is primarily because of ourselves. We have our biases, we have limiting beliefs, we have our vulnerabilities and fears that block us from actually seeing another person the way we should see them. And instead, we see them less as people and, as the concept says, more as objects. And once we start doing that, our reaction to them, the way we work with them, tends to be not quite the way we should. And let me again show this to you in the form of a little poll and ask you to let me know which one you would select. So here we have a situation where one day Joe asks his marketing head Sue, to do a task by end of day, but then Sue has a lot of her own problems fighting fires at work, plus she's got a sick child at home, and she has to unfortunately say, sorry, that won't work. Now, which one would you take? Which of the four would you like to pick on as your preferred choice? Yeah, perhaps we can stop the poll now. Thank you for that, Krishna. And as we can see, the majority of those of you who took part in the poll prefer to do the third or the fourth option. And obviously, very few said the first one. I'm not surprised, because that is really there as a default option. But and some of you suggested the second option. And I'm going to just ask ourselves, which one would be probably the best one given the situation that I would like to bring up today? There's a concept called active empathy or transposing. And this concept that we would speak about in coaching is to allow a person to try and understand what someone else is thinking, feeling, or wanting. And to do that, we have to ask ourselves certain questions. And the questions we ask is again coming from the fact that we view these through our own box of conditioned thinking. Am I aware of what your challenges are? In what way am I adding to them? And is my frame of conditioned thinking blocking good solutions? How do I feel about supporting you? How can I help you? It's when we ask these questions that we actually come to a situation called active empathy. Now, we all know that empathy is to feel for someone else, feel like they do, make an attempt to feel like you're doing in whatever situation you are. Active empathy, they say, or the definition that I'd like to use, goes beyond empathy, where we stop resisting our natural feelings. We go beyond that and step forward to support by doing what you feel you should be doing. This, if we were to follow this, probably, and like I said, there's no real one right answer for all these polls, but one would go for possibly the second option by saying, I really feel for you, but I'm going to do one step more. I'm going to actually step forward and help you out. I might do the work myself. Now, this people would, there's arguably people might prefer another option, but in the world of active empathy, that's probably the one that would work best, given the context. I'm moving on to the third challenge. And this is another interesting one where, people might think of this as not something that was so important, but it created a lot of trouble for him, because he was looking in terms of the fact that, was this really necessary? Should I divert funds to a daycare facility? Not only for the children of my employees, but that of the local community. And the question we need to ask here is something, again, a little bigger. We go in and we look at it as the awareness of the whole ecosystem, the outer awareness, and how that has to impact us, you, me, and everyone else who are in the position of leadership. Let's take a few moments and remind ourselves of the curve that I showed you a few minutes ago. In that curve, the sigmoid curve, we came to a point where we said was a reflection point, and if we did not take that pause for reflection, we could probably reach a stage of entropy and have poor performance. Let's add to that definition and say something more. Let's ask ourselves that when we were at that stage, bringing in the ecosystem, can we ask ourselves the big question as to, can I redefine what I'm doing now? I've taken a time to reflect. I've probably taken a time to reorient myself in my own working style. Now let me take one big step, a big jump, and redefine something I would like to call work. In the environment of work, oftentimes we tend to believe and give ourselves a great deal of emphasis on performance. But with performance, it will be fascinating were we to add a couple more components, one of which is learning and enjoyment. Oftentimes when I run programs for people in large groups and I share the screen without showing the triangle, and I say, tell me in real terms, how much of, say on a scale of, if I gave you 100 points, how would you allocate it among the three? And it's not surprising that the bulk of people tend to give the maximum number of points to performance at work, and probably the least to enjoyment, because in their mind, enjoyment is not to be had in the workplace. It's really a place for performance, some amount of time for learning, and enjoyment post work. The question is this really the way we'd like to have it? Is this really the way to bring optimal performance? And for that, I will go back into the concept that we draw from the world of sport. And some of you familiar with my biodata would know, my background would know that I've been for many years a sports coach, a tennis coach. So I'm very familiar with this particular part of, the concept of being in the zone, being in flow. The concept of being in flow brings all the three together in equal percentages. So it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is what would happen when a person is at flow, when they are fully immersed in an activity with a feeling, as they say, of energized focus, complete and full involvement, and enjoyment, all of which come together to make a person perform at their peak. The interesting thing is that it's a transformation available to anybody, anywhere, subject to the fact that certain initial conditions need to be met. That's interesting because the concept of flow is very well known. It was a concept developed by a person called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and I refer to that enormously. And the interesting thing is that what are these conditions, and how can we get to those conditions? So I put it all together in a form of a little jigsaw for us, and I'll walk us through that. If you are in any activity, it's really powerful to have clear goals all through that activity, with immediate feedback as you get into the activity. And if we were to do that, we would find that we are not only acting, but we have a high degree of awareness, and the two get merged. We're not having any distractions, there's no fears, there's no ego, they all disappear. And most importantly, we are working to the level at which our skill and our challenges are completely balanced. In fact, they call it an activity that is autotelic, which means that you set the goals and you reach them and you meet them. And if you do that, just meeting that goal, that itself is its own reward. But in the entire jigsaw that is out here, that the components coming in for the ideal state of flow, let's look at what would benefit the leader in terms of getting flow in his workplace. What is it that he needs to probably look at? And that would be the balance of challenge and skills. When skills and challenge are balanced, as many of us know from our, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this concept, you would find that when it's exactly balanced, you would find that flow takes place. But for flow to take place, and if it's not balanced, on one side of the screen, it's anxiety and worry. And on the other side, you tend to be bored and relaxed if work you're doing is too easy, or if it's too tough or too hard, it's on the other side of anxiety and worry. So it's to be in flow and to get that exact right balance between challenge and skills is actually quite a dynamic and complex process. It requires a lot of trial and error. It requires the person to be fully immersed in what they're doing. to start with, and to be in a situation where they make those iterations so that they keep coming back into flow. And the leader facilitates that process. The leader provides the environment where these people can get into flow. Let's just take an example for that. Let's look at how this could potentially happen. Imagine that you started an activity. On one side is anxiety, worry, and the other side is boredom and relaxation. In the beginning, it's too easy. After some time, you add to the challenge. You get into flow, and then you feel excited, you add more challenge. Then it becomes too hard. And then you kind of reduce the challenge, you get back into flow. Then again, you add more challenge, it becomes too hard, and so on. And you find yourself on and off getting into flow by tweaking the challenge, either making it tough or making it easy, and you go through this steep learning curve. But the nice part of it as a leader is that the more employees enter flow, more your business can thrive. And that's the nice part of it. The more you try to put an environment where employees enter flow, more your business can thrive. So where is Joe now? We walked through the path of Joe, being more self-aware. I spent time getting him to reflect and redefine his goals that he could actually get others to identify with. He's now started attempting a more collaborative style. He's learned the technique of transposing and active empathy. He makes an effort to map challenge and skill while delegating work. And fortunately for him, the employment engagement scores have gradually improved. And of course, he's now, because he's become aware, he's approved the funding for the daycare facility. So in the short time that I had, I've given you a feel for this topic of how a leader can drive and get to a thriving business, how he can create, as a coach, how we can support him to create a high-performing organization. And I walked you through the 3 levels of awareness at multiple, dimensions, and shared some concepts with you on terms of how we could support the person to get there. Before I end, I'm going to take a few more moments and ask you all to do the poll again. At the beginning of this presentation, many of you selected a few of these, 5 of the top ones. Perhaps now I might have, with some, I would say, persuasion or influencing, made you change your mind. Yeah, thank you so much, Krishna, for completing that poll. And what I find fascinating here, some of the top ones still remain the same, and quite rightly so. But I have noticed that we have a lot more on balancing skill, a lot more on social responsibility, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for being so participative today in respect of the polls and being such a fabulous audience. And with that, I would like to stop my presentation for today and take a few minutes to acknowledge